Whoa. Sound of Freedom is brought to us by Angel Studios and directed by Alejandro Monteverde, starring Jim Caviezel amongst other people. It's based on a true story of a man named Tim Ballard who works for the Department of Homeland Security and takes it upon himself to find this young girl who was sold into sex trafficking and goes through all these various hoops in order to try to find her and bring her back home to her father. Another review that has been very, very late on my part, so my apologies. But I saw this a few days ago on a Thursday night, and I avoided it for a while because of all the controversy surrounding the film. I wasn't really sure if I was going to be beaten over the head with a biblical message, as some faith-based movies tend to do, or at least some people accuse them of doing. But from what I've seen of the series Chosen that is brought to us by the same studio, where it talks about the life of Jesus, it's actually legit quality entertainment. Based on the word of mouth that I was hearing, even from critics who might not agree with the religious views of people like Jim Caviezel, or may not see eye to eye with the people who run the studio, Angel Studios, and a bunch of my friends were insisting that I go see this, and I thought, okay, fine, I'll give it a try. And I have to say that I found the movie very compelling, quite a big eye-opener, on a subject that I think we all know exists out there, but maybe not on the levels that we think it is, like it's just some passable problem that we can eventually figure out. It really puts it into perspective and really shows you just how messed up this situation is, because the text that's shown in the ending credits claims that there's more people in slavery than any other time in human history, especially when slavery was legal. Now, I don't know if that's really true or not, but based on certain things that I hear, I think this movie could potentially really bring awareness to some people and make them want to actually do something about this. Now, being a piece of entertainment, there's obviously going to be some movie logic of some kind. I didn't really find that too many big hoops on my end, although I think that maybe there could have been easily a more drawn-out section where Ballard is trying to argue with his boss on whether or not he should go to another country to find this young boy, who's the sibling of this young girl that he's trying to find. But I guess in order to keep things moving and for time purposes, they had to cut it down. So I'm not really bothered by that. The movie is really a simple search and rescue type of mission. There's really not a whole lot of deep, complex emotional subtleties that are going on, at least maybe not in the ways that you would expect from something like this, but there are some moments that we do get with some downtime with the characters. In particular, when one person in Honduras that Jim Caviezel goes to visit, and he reveals why he actually wants to take part in finding this young girl. He reveals that he spent the night with this young woman who he assumed was 25 years old, but then when he started to notice how she was dressed and with her shoes, he realized that she was just a young teenager, 14 years old, and he's felt a huge amount of guilt and conviction ever since. Now he's taken it upon himself to take part in this mission to find this young girl, so in a way that he can correct what he did wrong. When it comes to Jim Caviezel, I'll admit I haven't really watched a whole lot of his movies or his projects. The way he plays this character is very subtle. He's not overly dramatic and demanding the audience to sympathize with his situation and his desire to save these kids. But in particular, when he's questioning this one pedophile that he arrests in the first act of the movie, he finds a way to get this guy to side with him in order to get him into a trap, and then when he leaves for the night, he almost vomits, holding all that disgust in, and then he finally lets it out when he gets into a place on his own. And in some ways, I think he's a very underrated actor. Due to his Catholic faith, odds are there was going to be some obstacles that he'd have to overcome. And I think Mel Gibson said to him at one point in time when he was filming Passion of the Christ that Hollywood is probably not going to give you a whole lot of work after this. He's had maybe somewhat of a modest career, and I think he should get more roles like this. But unfortunately, I think due to his endorsement of certain conspiracy theories, that's probably not going to get him anywhere in Hollywood. We'll talk about that later, but even so, I think in a lot of ways he's very underappreciated, and I think he deserves a little more credit than he gets. When certain scenes play out, like in the opening, when that one woman is tricking all these children to pose in front of the camera as children models, basically, which plays into the pedophile sting operation that Tim Ballard is using to find these kids, along with the young girl being thrown into the same room by this middle-aged man who's clearly belligerent. Camera cuts to the outside of the building, he closes the curtains, and it's dead silent. Coming from a faith-based studio, they can't really show anything of the like. Sometimes your imagination is a lot more horrifying. The same thing can be said on the flip side, but ultimately, I personally think using your imagination makes it even worse. The thought of it, yeah, enough said. They do kind of push the limits of violence and suggestive content just a little bit, not too much. In fact, the theater that I saw this in, it was almost packed. I was kind of surprised by that. There was even a couple of people to my left in the row that I was sitting in that were actually Mennonites. Not something I can usually say in my own experience going to the movies. And I guess it's not really a spoiler if you know the story or if you have somewhat of an idea of how it's going to go down. He eventually ends up rescuing this young girl and bringing her back to her father, and it ends in the same way that it starts, where she's in her bedroom playing on the drums, singing some kind of song, and the camera zooms out or as opposed to the opening, it was zooming in. I found it in a nice way to be very poetic. And the sequence of Ballard finding her and rescuing her, he has to go into this area in the jungle where it's overrun by rebels. And when he eventually gets discovered, he has to lie his way into the camp, saying that he's a doctor and he wants to give out vaccines. And he recognizes her by the tattoo on the back of her neck. He sneaks her out, and they get chased by the rebels. That whole sequence was freaking riveting. I was wondering if they were going to breeze right through it, but after about maybe 5 minutes or so, my heart started to fly with adrenaline. Holy crow. Now, I think we've held it off for long enough. When it comes to the controversy surrounding the movie, I'm going to try not to focus too much on that, but a lot of people have been afraid to see this movie thinking that it's just going to thump the Bible over their heads and be very preachy. I can tell you for a fact, it's really not like that. There's a few references to the Bible and to God, yes, especially with God's children are not for sale. I think it's okay for movies to have a positive depiction of Christianity or priests or pastors or anybody of the religious crowd, Jewish or Muslim or whatever. I don't care personally. It's really mostly about Ballard finding this young girl and trying to bring her back to her family. That being said, the message from Jim Caviezel that plays in the credits, I think in a way kind of pushed the limits just a little bit. I think his heart was in the right place. One remark that he made though, where it took a long time for the movie to be officially released, he said that they faced every single obstacle known to man in Hollywood, making it seem like they were against this movie from the very start. Hearing him say that, it just made my eyes roll. Everything else he said I thought was fine, but that one little thing that he threw in there, I thought, okay, I see where you're going with this. You don't need to throw that in there. It's not horribly done, but I think he could have just left that part out of there. And apparently he's endorsed a lot of conspiracy theories about Hollywood harvesting children for their adrenaline. I try not to get into the conspiracy theory territory, but that to me sounds ludicrous. I'm not saying Hollywood isn't corrupt, but I think it's stretching it a little too far when you believe that kind of thing about Hollywood, that everybody in Hollywood is like that. And if you listen to people like Dan Murrell, who talks about in detail how this film was eventually distributed, that I think was a more objective look at how exactly this film came to the place that it is right now. And with its box office returns, it's actually quite a shock that it's making a lot of money, and it's maybe in some ways the best movie of the summer as far as box office returns go. And that's due to the ticket buying system that has been offered by the studio. Some people can't afford to buy a movie ticket, especially with how inflation is going right now. I don't know exactly how that all works. Again, people like Dan Murrell can tell you more about that in a better detail, but that's probably another big reason why, besides its quality, that the movie is making such a huge financial success at the movies. I know I went on a bit of a tangent just now. Even with all that outside influence that's unfortunately tampered the film's reputation, I still think the movie is very important to check out, especially regarding its subject matter. If you're worried about all the controversy surrounding it, besides what happens in the credits with the message, the rest of the movie is not like that at all. Those are my thoughts on Sound of Freedom. Thank you guys so much for watching. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are if you've seen it, and as always, see you in the next one.